This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
If the Delphi murder case has proven anything, it's that investigations are only as strong as the people running them. But what happens when key evidence is ignored? When investigators zero in on one suspect and seem to dismiss everything else? And when the prosecution is accused of hiding evidence that could pretty much change everything? Right now, we're looking at serious allegations that prosecutors buried a jailhouse confession from Ron Logan, the man whose property the victims were found on. We also know that alternative suspects were never fully investigated, and law enforcement may have misplaced or suppressed critical evidence that could exonerate Richard Allen. Today, we have retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer here, host of the Break the Case podcast, available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Here to help us untangle the mess, Jen, as someone who's worked inside high-profile investigations, does this case look like justice at work, or does it look like law enforcement rushed to close the case without doing their due diligence, or something far darker?
Oh, Tony, this is going to be one of those cases I think that will really bother so many of us for just the reasons you've named.
Yeah.
Let's start with the fact that Ron Logan, again, probable cause affidavit submitted by the FBI to a judge, signed off on to, that stated that Ron Logan probable cause that he committed these murders all those years ago, back in only March after this all happened.
Yeah.
And it was pretty compelling probable cause at that time. Again, there was a rift between the state and local authorities and the FBI. The FBI no longer was allowed to be a part of the investigation. Again, they did not have venue other than by invitation. And now we see these confessions that were made to a jailhouse individual named Ricky Davis. Gosh, that we didn't know about. And the particular thing that's bothersome, Tony, is the mention of the box cutter, which then we heard on the stand a box cutter was likely used with these girls.
The first thing that the prosecution and Delphi will say is he failed his test, his polygraph miserably failed it. They like to add that little adjective into there. When did this polygraph take place? Who administered it? How did he fail it? What questions? We don't know any of those details. And also consider the source that's saying that. The same source that seems to be not admitting things or deleting things or covering things up left and right about this case. So if it doesn't really play to their advantage, they seem to not really say much about it. It's kind of shocking when you go all the way back to 2017 and realize that you had this man who's coming out with these accusations, but they're just poo-pooing it because of this polygraph they claim he failed. Why would you not look into this further, even if he fails the damn polygraph, considering the person he's talking about and the information that he's giving that no one else has other than investigators?
Well, a polygraph is a great investigative tool that we use. So often, it's not even the actual polygraph, but how they accept it, they refuse to take it, how they act during one. And the problem with a polygraph, depending on who administers it, it has to be done delicately. And I mean by that, that there are very specific questions that have to be asked that are only 1 to 3 questions. And they have to be very finite to get the truth out of an individual. Who administered it? I love that question. The FBI has the leading polygraph program. Those polygraphers go to school for months to be polygraph examiners. And who are we dealing with here? I've seen it all in the continuum of amazing polygraph examiners and not so amazing polygraph examiners. There's a reason why we don't see polygraphs used in court.
Mm-hmm. And those are questions I think that are very valid to ask. You also had Ricky Davis. he said he was willing to do the polygraph. He volunteered for it. According to them, he failed it. And I put that in big air quotes for those of you listening on the podcast. He was also willing to wear a wire back in 2017 when Ron Logan was still alive. So he's saying, look, if you don't want to believe me here, I will wear the wire. And they're like, no, sir, we don't need you to do that. Okay, number one, is that something that happens sometimes in prison where someone is an informant? They're like, let's do a wire if you're telling the truth rather than just an eyewitness testimony. And why would they turn this down when at the time, there is no Richard Allen. There is no prime suspect other than Ron Logan that had been looked at very closely by the FBI. Why say no to this?
There's no reason to say no. There's nothing better than having a witness come forward and be willing to be wired up and to get what we call a consensual monitoring tape. That's exactly what you want to have happen. So many times they say, oh my gosh, I can't do that. What if somebody, sees a wire, they think I'm a snitch, or, they get all concerned. But when somebody wants to, oh my gosh, it's a dream come true. And again, just poor law enforcement actions continue in this case, or continued in that case, the case of Delphi. There's so much there, Tony, that's concerning on how the whole case was handled.
It seems the main thing that Delphi is going after is they're trying to attack the credibility of Ricky Davis. Obviously, he's an inmate. He's in there for dealing meth. He's got 50 years that he has to serve. And he's saying, look, I'm doing this for the good of these girls. He says, I'm a father too, and I'm just paraphrasing, this is wrong. This needs to be looked at. I don't want any special treatment. I don't want my sentence reduced. I'm not going after any of that. If anything, he's putting himself at risk by putting himself out there the way he has now as being a snitch, which is obviously not looked at very fondly in prison. Do you see anything in this where this guy would have any reason to lie other than if he's a compulsive liar or something of that nature? I just don't see it.
Well, the only thing could be some people, and this is why, famous convicted people get killed, like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? The person who kills them wants to make a name for themselves. That has to be considered as a possibility. But the fact that he doesn't want any consideration, I think, is huge. The other thing is considering his crime. So, is he in there for fraud? Is he in there for a crime of what they call moral turpitude, where they've lied and he hasn't? He's committed apparently a conviction for drug offense. And a lot of times when people get cleaned up and they're no longer using, so they're no longer selling, so they can use, et cetera, they do have a level of consciousness that comes back because they're back to normal. They're not under the influence anymore, and they're not driven by those demons. And so I think a lot of what he says really holds true. And of course, I'm talking about that box cutter comment again, plus all the other facts we know about Ron Logan. I never understood, and I know somebody that was involved in the investigation from the word go, and I never understood why the local and state department wanted to turn away from Ron Logan. The only reason ever given was that he was too old. And I think that is absolutely baloney. We know so many 70-year-old perverts and pedophiles and sexual deviants. Just because you're 70 doesn't mean your mind's right.
No, he was still out there working with livestock. So look, if you can handle livestock, you can handle two small girls. That's a ridiculous argument that they made at the beginning, but there's so many ridiculous arguments here.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.